Well, hello, everyone. My name is Jordan Finken. I'm the rare book and manuscript librarian here at the Cloud Library, one of the world's truly great HUC-JIR libraries. It's a distinct perk and pleasure of my position to get to welcome guests and patrons to our events, both here in person as well as virtually. And I will add a pitch to keep an eye on our website as well as our social media for announcements regarding upcoming events and exhibits. I just want to thank Abigail Bacon, our head of public services, for her tireless efforts to make these events possible, as well as the library staff for everything they do to make this such a remarkable library. Now, you didn't come here to listen to me, so I'm being very good. It's my pleasure to welcome Daniel Fisher-Lignay, professor of Hebrew Bible and the languages of the Near East here at Hebrew Union College, who will go on to introduce today's speaker, Professor Christine Thomas, the insights of whose talk we are soon to enjoy. And on that note, I will pass it off to Daniel.
Thank you so much, Dr. Finken, and thank you all for being here today. Welcome. It is my honor and pleasure to introduce Dr. Christine Thomas, our dear, dear colleague here at HUC and the author of Royal Women at Ugarit, Reconceiving the House of the Father, published by Routledge in 2025 as a part of the august Ancient Word series. Dr. Thomas is assistant professor of Hebrew Bible with a joint appointment here at HUC and at Xavier University. Dr. Thomas holds a PhD from Harvard University and an MDiv from Princeton Theological Seminary. She's a graduate of Smith College and also held a Fulbright Fellowship at the University of Tokyo after graduation. Dr. Thomas's paradigm-pushing and breaking scholarship focuses on both biblical literature and the history of the ancient Near East. She explores gender dynamics, both in biblical narratives and in Late Bronze Age Syria, where she works on the roles played by royal women in the political world. And this is the very subject that we're here to discuss and learn about today. Before I pass this over to Dr. Thomas, I would like to share the next two talks in the Cloud Library series. On Tuesday, March 11th, I hope you'll join us on Zoom for Behind the Laughter, How the Purim Spiel Came to America, with Dr. Zev Elef, president of Gratz College. And on Tuesday, April 29th, right here in this room at Clow and on Zoom, I hope you will join us for the moral dilemma created by a religious canon, reflections on how to read, how to teach, how to live, with Hebrew Union College's own Dr. David Aaron. These will be both wonderful experiences, and I encourage you to join them as you've joined us today. And without further ado, I'm very pleased to welcome Dr. Christine Thomas.
Political intrigue, diplomacy, internecine conflicts, and power grabs. This is the stuff of the ancient world, as much as the one we are living in. In the next 40 minutes or so, we will travel to ancient Syria and encounter the royal women who were at the center of their political world, whose lives are preserved in cuneiform tablets. Once we have investigated these texts, we will turn to the Hebrew Bible. In light of these ancient Syrian queens, we will engage with King David's women, specifically Queen Bathsheba. Bathsheba, the mother of Solomon, exulting over David and promoting her son to the throne. The glimpse I will give you of royal women in Late Bronze Age Syria and in the literary world of the Hebrew Bible is part of a larger work. My book, Royal Women at Ugarit, Reconceiving the House of the Father, challenges the traditional model of gender and power in the ancient Near East by looking at these royal women. It has long been accepted that the world's oldest written texts from the ancient Near East depict patrimonial societies, where everybody, male or female, was identified with a particular house under the rule of a father or a father figure. Famous examples include the House of David, depicted in the Hebrew Bible. But how real was this house of the father concept? And did households belong exclusively to men? Did society revolve completely around fathers and father figures? Or was this just a metaphor that does not adequately describe the realities of relationships and power? The widely accepted theory in Near Eastern archaeology and history is that the metaphor was real, both fact and symbol, as one influential scholar describes it. Fatherhood has thus been understood as the apex of social and political power. Yet I argue that every father is the son of a mother. Gender relationships, fundamental to household life, were fundamental to larger social structures. I challenge the dominant conception of a patrimonial society as a system constituted exclusively by men's relationships to each other. Father and son relationships depend on women to reproduce and mediate these relationships, not just physically, but socially and politically. I show that the relative positions of men were shaped by their relationships to women, and that women exercised agency in royal politics. My book uses data on women to rethink patrimonialism, resulting in a more three-dimensional picture that takes women's lives and agency seriously. My book reveals the complex and critical roles of royal women in Late Bronze Age Syria. We have no pictures of these women, but here is an object that one of them might have used: the lid of an ivory box with a depiction of the deity known as the mistress of animals. My book presents 3 case studies of royal women in ancient letters and legal verdicts that involve the rulers of 2 important Syrian city-states, Ugarit and Amurru, and their Hittite imperial overlords. The first case study of my book analyzes letters addressed by kings of Ugarit to their mothers. These letters attest to the fact that royal women could maintain their positions as queen from the reign of their husbands into the reign of their sons. The letters deal with diplomatic and military matters, showing that the mother of a king had a role to play and consultation to provide on Ugarit's foreign relations. The second case study of my book extends my analysis of the relationships between royal women and their sons into Hittite imperial verdicts concerning 2 such pairs. The first pair benefited from the ability of a royal woman to maintain her tenure as queen after the death of her husband. In the second pair, a royal woman's loss of position as queen undermined her sons and her male kinsmen's positions. The third case study continues to look at imperial verdicts, but with respect to just one matter: the divorce and execution of the king of Ugarit's wife. These verdicts widen the scope of analysis to the full spectrum of relations between women and men, not just mothers and sons, but fathers and daughters, sisters and brothers, husbands and wives. The case was dramatic. The king of Ugarit divorced and exiled his wife, who was the daughter of the Hittite imperial line in the neighboring kingdom of Amurru. But this was not enough. In a battle of wills with her brother, the king extradited his divorced wife and put her to death within the very structure of imperial rule that should have protected her. Was her crime adultery, as some scholars suggest? Or were accusations of adultery meant to obfuscate her political intrigue? The elaborate negotiations needed to seal this woman's fate and put her to death reveal the power she wielded. These case studies reveal that the capacity of a single woman to function simultaneously as mother, daughter, wife, and sister mediated alliances among multiple men across generations. Women operated on 2 axes in this system. On the horizontal axis, they mediated relationships in an interdynastic system as the daughter and wife, who could make 2 men father and son, or as the sister and wife who made men brothers. On the vertical axis, as royal women tended to outlive their husbands, those who successfully maintained their status as queen and royal mother could become agents in dynastic succession and influential in periods of political transition. In the final chapter of my book, I extend the insights from my historical case studies to the two major royal women from the biblical house of David, Bathsheba and Michal. As literary figures, these characters remain as compelling for readers today as they were for the biblical writers. They push at the boundaries of our historical imaginations and insist that we consider the subjectivity and agency of the women who survive in the laconic lines of ancient tablets. By the same token, the late Bronze Age royal women who lived, gave birth, and died in ancient Syria lend urgency to the need to reassess the foundational canonical narratives which have for so long informed our understandings of gender and power. All the text of my book were deciphered from tablets excavated at the ancient site of Ugarit, modern-day Latakia in Syria. The rich and varied archaeological finds from Ugarit have transformed the study of the late Bronze Age in Turkey, the Levant, and Egypt, the world that gave rise to the Hebrew Bible. The Eastern Mediterranean in the second millennium BCE, known as the Bronze Age, was a political world as complex as any we may find today. While Egypt always remained a grand empire through history, in the late Bronze Age, a new power arose in the ancient Near East, the Hittites. The Hittites were the people whose homeland was Hatti, modern-day Turkey. In the late second millennium, under the rule of Shupluliuma I, the Hittites waged war and extended their rule through the Eastern Mediterranean, down through Syria, overcoming Egyptian rule there. Their jewel in the crown was the city-state of Ugarit. Ugarit was a cosmopolitan site, a wealthy center of commerce, located strategically with respect to its Syrian neighbors and the Hittite imperial powers. Ugarit's wealth and pivotal position in interregional trade networks made it a target for Egyptian and Hittite imperial expansion. It had to walk a careful line to maintain its autonomy, as well as its relationship with its overlords and neighboring kingdoms. Royal women were frequently at the center of these strategies of Ugarit, as well as in diplomatic relations among the larger states which surrounded it. Once the Hittites rose to power, they made use of royal women in asserting their dominance in the states they conquered. When the Hittites conquered surrounding states, they gave their daughters in marriage to the subjugated rulers, with the stipulation that these Hittite princesses would reign as queen and their sons would rule as kings after them. In this way, Hittite royal women were at the center of the architecture of imperial rule. Their queenship made their sons kings. Ugarit's world was regulated by Hittite rule. The Hittite imperial legal verdicts we will consider show how the great kings arbitrated disputes among their Syrian vassals and even within the kingdom of Ugarit. Yet, looking closely at these verdicts, we see that the rulers of Ugarit were also able to assert their interests within Hittite rule. Nowhere is this seen more clearly than in the text concerning royal women. The political position of Ugarit and the leverage it was able to wield within the Hittite system was grounded in its economic position. 5 harbors in the borders of Ugarit carried on active trade along the whole spectrum of the Eastern Mediterranean, from the Hittite regions to the north, south to Egypt, and west to Cyprus. Ugarit was at the heart of a system of international commerce. Ugarit generated significant wealth and also controlled access to goods. Artifacts from the royal palace attest to Ugarit's wealth and interregional reach. Here is a golden platter with scenes from a royal hunt, which was excavated from Ugarit. Here is a golden plaque with an image of the goddess Hathor, showing Egyptians' connections still remaining in Ugarit. Here is a figurine of the storm god Baal, the patron deity of Ugarit. Baal is the Canaanite deity who is so often the focus of polemics in the Hebrew Bible. By the late 13th century, the Ugaritic royal palace was a huge complex containing some 90 rooms, 5 large courtyards, and some smaller courts, measuring at its zenith some 120 meters by 85 meters. The tablets uncovered in the palace attest to this political world and are the basis of my study. We will look now at one piece of my research, royal women as mothers, considering the first 2 case studies from my book. The first sources we will examine are the letters in the Ugaritic language sent by kings of Ugarit to their mothers. These tablets show that royal women remained queen after the death of their husbands into the reign of their sons. The texts follow an epistolary formula that display the honor that kings showed their mothers. These letters were written when the king was away from Ugarit, most often in his visits to the Hittite imperial court. The messages are laconic. They have formulas for addressing and receiving and greetings of welfare, but they communicate as much in this epistolary structure as they do in their abbreviated messages. This is the typical opening address of a letter, showing the deference a king showed his mother. To the queen, my mother, say, message of the king, your son. At my mother's feet I fall. With my mother, may it be well. In addition to the language of obeisance, at my mother's feet I fall, the formula of the letter reflects deference. The queen as addressee is listed first, followed by the reciprocal identification of the king as his mother's son. And we know this from comparison across epistolary frameworks, that the person listed first is the higher status person. The king may have identified himself in many ways as the son of the former king, for instance. But here, his royal title is paired with his status as the queen's son. The pairing of the royal titles, queen and king, with the kinship terms, mother and son, suggest a reciprocity in their status. But consider that the titles, mother and queen, are not simply a statement of kinship. They encode a political trajectory in which a woman was able to maintain her rule across 2 generations, mediating the transfer of power between father and son. She had been a player in the political world of Ugarit, the Hittite imperial powers, and Ugarit's neighboring states since before her son was born. She had a role to play and counsel to offer as her son inherited this constellation of relationships and came into his own within it. This dimension of the Queen Mother's role and power is demonstrated in the fact that the king's letters to his mother consistently report on diplomatic and military matters when the king was away from Ugarit, going to the Hittite court to offer tribute. In this letter, we see the report the king made of his visit to the Hittite court, including military concerns. To the queen, my mother, say, message of the king, your son. At the feet of my mother I fall. With my mother, may it be well. May the gods protect you and keep you well. Here with me it is well. There with my mother, whatever is well, send word back to me. Here they have vowed an offering to the king as tribute. And then the tablet is broken. It continues. Now, if the Hittite comes up, I will send a message to you. And if they do not go up, I will certainly send one. Now you, my mother, do not be afraid and do not be distressed. Once again in this letter, we see the deference the king showed his mother. He reports to her on the giving of tribute and promises that he will keep her informed about any military move the Hittites may make. As in Hebrew, the term go up or come up refers to military confrontation. The promises of the Ugaritic king to send further messages indicates that their communication was ongoing when he was away from Ugarit. Another letter from the Ugaritic king to his mother introduces another royal woman into the political equation, the Hittite great queen. To the queen, my mother, say, message of the king, your son. At the feet of my mother I fall. With my mother may it be well. May the gods protect you and keep you well. Here with me all is well. There with my mother whatever is well, send word back to me. As tribute they have vowed an offering to the queen. My words she did indeed accept, and the face of the king shone upon us. What is fascinating about this letter is that it not only shows the elevated status of the queen mother of Ugarit, but also of the Hittite great queen herself. The king of Ugarit offers tribute to the Hittite great queen and thereby incurs the favor of the great king. These letters in Ugaritic attest to the patterns of relationship between royal mothers and sons. Yet because much was assumed and the names of the persons are for the most part never given, we have to look at other texts to find how historically identifiable royal women and their sons operated. These texts are the Hittite legal verdicts issued by the imperial overlord to resolve disputes both within Ugarit and with its neighbors. They were written in Akkadian, the lingua franca of the day. In these verdicts, unlike in the Ugaritic letters, all the parties are named. Two sets of royal mothers and their sons at Ugarit, attested in these verdicts, offer a study in contrast between fates women might face over the course of their tenure in a royal household and the way their differing power impacted the power of their sons. The two royal mothers both came to Ugarit from the neighboring kingdom of Amuru. They were but one generation apart, being on the one hand the mother of Amastamru, king of Ugarit, and on the other his repudiated wife. Amastamru's mother, Ahatumilki, maintained her position as queen from the reign of her husband into the reign of her son. Yet Amastamru's wife, who clearly enjoyed wealth and power in her royal role in Ugarit, was ultimately divorced and sent back to Amuru. Her own son was threatened with the loss of his rights as heir if he should defend his mother or reinstate her as queen, even after his father Amastamru's death. This tablet is the opulent dowry of the first queen, Ahatumilki, that she brought with her when she left her home in the kingdom of Amuru and came to Ugarit to become the queen and wife of Nikmepa, then the king of Ugarit. She established her power in Ugarit and maintained her position as queen in the midst of tumultuous events in Syria, the reconquering of her home kingdom by the Egyptians, warfare between the Hittites and the Egyptians, and the Hittite overthrow of the king of Amuru, who was likely her brother. She may have brought her wealth from Amuru, but she became independent of the changing fortunes of her home kingdom, establishing her base of power in Ugarit. Furthermore, even after the death of her husband, she continued to exercise her power. She defended her son's position as king and mediated a dispute between her sons. The Hittite legal verdict, which records this case, shows that Ahatumilki, the queen, was responsible for arbitrating the dispute among her sons. If we look carefully at this text, we see that the Hittite rulers who adjudicated the case were not so much imposing their own verdict as authorizing the actions Ahatumilki herself had taken. The rule of her son, the king Amastamru, was threatened by his brothers, Hishmi-Sharuma and Ir-Sharuma. Ahatumilki intervened, exiling the offending brothers to Elashia, ancient Cyprus, dividing the patrimony and establishing Amastamru's line for all generations to come. She made Hishmi-Sharuma and Ir-Sharuma swear an oath before the goddess Ishtar that neither they nor any of their descendants would challenge the terms of their exile. The verdict reads, Hishmi-Sharuma and Ir-Sharuma have committed an offense against Amastamru, king of Ugarit. Ahatumilki, their mother, queen of Ugarit, has given them their share of inheritance, of silver and gold, of their household goods, of all that is theirs, and sent them up to Elashia. Furthermore, before Ishtar of the steppe, she put an oath between them. If in the future Hishmi-Sharuma and Ir-Sharuma, their sons or the sons of their sons, should make a claim concerning their share of inheritance against Ammistamru, king of Ugarit, or against his sons, or the sons of his sons, they will transgress the oath. The issue here is kingship and the patrimonial line, yet it is the woman who arbitrates and mediates it. She acts as the political pivot among the former king, their sons, and the designated future kings of Ugarit. Having outlived her husband, she becomes the link between the previous royal order and the ones to come. The second case is an inversion of the first. Instead of defending her son's rule, in this case, the royal woman endangers it. She was also a princess from Amuru, the wife of Ammistamru. She was divorced, lost her position as queen, and had to give up her claim on her children, particularly her son Utri-Sharuma, the heir to the throne. Disputes concerning the divorce continued well beyond these initial verdicts and engendered at least 10 surviving verdicts involving the kings of Ugarit, Amuru, and Hatti. This tablet is from the first stage of the divorce. Her name is never given in these proceedings. Instead, she is referred to as the daughter of Bentishina, who was king of Amuru. Not giving her name and referring to her only as the daughter of a foreign king was part of the strategy of alienating her and removing her from her position as the queen of Ugarit. This passage is from the conclusion of the verdict, which deals with the relationship between royal mother and son. What is remarkable about this case is that Ammistamru sought not only to remove his wife from her position as queen, but to prevent his heir, their son Utri-Sharuma, from reinstating her as queen after his death. If Utri-Sharuma chooses to follow his mother back to Amuru, or if he returns her to queenship in Ugarit after his father's death, he will lose his position as king. His surrender of his position and patrimony is expressed here in this verdict in the idiom of putting his garment on the stool and leaving. The verdict reads, "Now Utri-Sharuma is the crown prince in Ugarit. If Utri-Sharuma says, 'I will follow my mother,' let him put his garment on the stool and let him go away, and Ammistamru, king of Ugarit, shall install another of his sons in Ugarit as his successor. If Ammistamru should go to his fate, and Utri-Sharuma should take his mother and should restore her as queen in Ugarit, then let Utri-Sharuma put his garment on the stool and go where he will, and his majesty the Hittite great king, will install another son of Ammistamru as king in Ugarit." These prohibitions assume that a royal woman could claim power or be given power by virtue of her relationship to her son, even in the case of exile. The verdict indicates that the reciprocal benefit to mother and son of their political collaboration was great enough to require the threat of the total loss of the son's position as king to prevent it. As in the Ugaritic letters from the king to his mother, the positions of mother and son are reciprocal, but here in the negative sense. Because his mother has lost her position, any attempt of her son to maintain their relationship will cause him to lose his own position. The high stakes set for the consequences of Utri-Sharuma's allegiance to his mother indicate that such allegiance was not only possible, but represented enough of a danger to require such a high penalty. Ammistamru's anxiety about the configuration of authority in Ugarit after his death is profound enough to make intervention by the Hittites more desirable than the return of the former queen. Ammistamru's concern is ultimately not so much who will be king in Ugarit after his death, but who will be queen. These historical royal mothers and sons shed light on the Bible's depiction of Bathsheba, the mother of Solomon and wife of King David. Bathsheba's position is not so different from a Hatumilgi. One of Solomon's brothers, Adonijah, proclaims himself king, posing a threat not only to their father King David's authority, but to Solomon himself. Bathsheba rises to defend Solomon's interest and her own. Bathsheba promotes her son Solomon, ensuring his succession as David's heir, and gains status as queen mother during Solomon's rule. 1 Kings 1 opens with the rebellion of David's son Adonijah, who attempts to claim kingship. The prophet Nathan comes to Bathsheba to warn her of Adonijah's power play. In this speech, it is clear that the positions of mother and son are joined. Nathan urges her to take action to save her own life and the life of her son. In acting on behalf of her son, Bathsheba acts in her own interest as well. Bathsheba goes before the feeble David and asserts that he has promised her that her son Solomon will be king. She goes well beyond the advice of Nathan. She impels David to name Solomon as his successor and make him king. In verse 17 through 20, Bathsheba says to David, "My Lord, you swore to your servant by the Lord your God, saying, 'Your son Solomon shall succeed me as king, and he shall sit on my throne.' But now suddenly Adonijah has become king, though you, my lord the king, do not know it. He has sacrificed oxen, fatted cattle, and sheep in abundance, and has invited all the sons of the king, the priest Abiathar and Joab, the commander of the army. But your servant Solomon he has not invited. But you, my lord the king, the eyes of all Israel are on you to tell them who shall sit on the throne of my lord the king after him." She then implies that if David does not, both her life and Solomon's life will be at risk when he dies. In verse 21, she says, "Otherwise it will come to pass when my lord the king sleeps with his ancestors, that my son Solomon and I will be counted offenders." As in the text from Ugarit, here again we see the reciprocity in the fates of mother and son, and the power a royal woman could exert in assuring her son's kingship. While Nathan is promised comes in to confirm her words, David proclaims his decision not to Nathan, but to Bathsheba. David calls her in and announces to her his decision to make Solomon king. Furthermore, David refers to Solomon as her son, further emphasizing the reciprocal relationship of mother and son. "Your son Solomon shall succeed me as king, and he shall sit on my throne in my place." Once Solomon is king, Bathsheba continues to enjoy an elevated status as queen mother. The biblical text vividly portrays Bathsheba's continued exercise of power even after the death of King David. Through a series of exchanges, we witness Bathsheba's role as a gatekeeper to royal influence. Adonijah, Solomon's brother, seeks to reassert his claim to the kingdom by requesting David's concubine, Abishag, as a wife. Rather than going to Solomon, he makes his request to Bathsheba. Her terse responses highlight her position as a mediator of power among men. Her agreement to put Adonijah's request before Solomon is a calculated move, showcasing her influence in shaping the fate of the kingdom. In making Adonijah's audacious request known to the king, she very likely intentionally sets up a situation in which Solomon will become so enraged that he will eliminate his rival, ensuring both her son's and her own claim to power. When Bathsheba appears before Solomon, the ceremonial gestures of respect and honor he bestows upon her underscore her status as the mother of the king. Solomon's obeisance to his mother reflects a ritualized exchange, reminiscent of the formalities observed in the Ugaritic letters between kings and their mothers, the queens. When she comes before Solomon, he bows down to her and has a throne set up for her on his right. He enacts the obeisance expressed in the letters. Verse 19 reads, "The king rose to meet her and bowed down to her. Then he sat on his throne and had a throne brought for the king's mother, and she sat on his right." This recalls the epistolary formula used by the king of Ugarit to his mother, the queen. "To the queen, my mother, say, message from the king, your son. At my mother's feet I fall." Solomon promises not to refuse her request. However, once Bathsheba states Adonijah's request, Solomon's enraged indignation reveals the precarious nature of power dynamics within the royal household. In his swift and lethal response, Solomon asserts his authority and underscores the high stakes involved in claiming a woman associated with another man. Not only Solomon's position is secured by this action, but also Bathsheba's position as queen mother. Bathsheba's actions ultimately seal Adonijah's fate. Bathsheba is a formidable force in the political arena. We will never know what court intrigue or conversation lay behind the queen of Ugarit, Ahatumilki's exile of her sons, King Amistamru's brothers. But the contours of the power of a royal woman who mediates among her sons to support one's patrimonial claim and sever the others, which emerges from the Hittite verdicts, resonates with the role of Bathsheba. The biblical authors shaped their literary figures in terms that were credible for their ancient setting. Drawing parallels between the biblical text and the Hittite imperial verdicts and the Ugaritic letters, we see a recurring theme of women maintaining their position from husband to son, acting in roles central to the politics of patrimonial succession. Late Bronze Age letters and legal verdicts and the Hebrew Bible reveal the systems of gender and power that underlie patrimonial systems. Women were pivotal to exchanges of power from their husbands to their sons and among brothers. The fall or endurance of patrimonial houses hinged on a royal woman's ability to maintain her position across generations and advance her own interest as well as the interest of her son. Women's agency was central to patrimonial systems, whether in late Bronze Age text or in biblical compositions. This recognition leads not simply to an appreciation of women's agency, but to a reconception of the patrimonial system itself. The so-called House of the Father was not a system revolving around one powerful man, but a network of alliances in which women played pivotal roles. Thank you. Okay, there was a wonderful question about Avishag's role as a mediator of power between David and Adonijah. And I would say absolutely, that is something I wanted to expand on. There is a wonderful piece that my students have read called "In the Shadow of the King" by David Gunn and Donna Fool. And their statement is, politics are written on women's bodies. So this is a really visceral way in which a woman associated with one king to take the woman is to take the king's power. So she is as much a mediator. She's not a royal woman, but she's within this scenario in which men are defining themselves based on their relationships to women. So the question was, how does this conception that I've offered of patrimonialism shift the ecology and of gender within these systems, and how it causes us to think about masculinity differently? That's it. Well, so the standard argument about patrimonialism is there's this sort of parthenogenesis from one man to another, that they're just repeated, and there's this heavy emphasis on masculinity. But when you see men in relationships, the father being the son of the mother, it's a very different dimension, that men's authority is based on women. And that instead of men need women in order to form their relationships with each other. And that's what I talked about, the two axes, that you have, my standard line is patrimonialism is dependent on the political polyvalence of women, which basically means that you have a single woman and she occupies various positions. On the one hand, she's a wife to one, she's a daughter to another, she's a mother to another, she's a sister to another. And all these men are defining their relationships to each other based on their relationship to the women. So that you can't be a husband, a father, or wife without a woman there to create that role. Oh, wonderful. So this is a question about Michal. So the question about Michal is she finally gets her voice at the end in 2 Samuel 6 when David's dancing before the ark. And there's this sort of complicated relationship David has with Michal. He's rejected her on one level, but on the other, he wants her in his house to encourage his legitimacy. And Michal is a perfect example of women as a pivot point and the way in which you name a woman reflecting the relationships among men. So in the beginning, she starts off as Saul's daughter. And there she's, the mediating link. David wants to have a relationship to Saul. He's excited to be the king's son-in-law. Saul is trying to use his daughter to bring David into a fatal encounter with the Philistines. But then we have a shift where she then is called wife of David, where she's defending David, saving him from Saul. So we have this mediation. Is she the daughter of Saul or is she the wife of David? And she lets him go. But at the very end in 2 Samuel 6, she has become her father's daughter. And what you see is that David never expresses his hostility or his desire for power against Saul or Jonathan. But here, that rage against Saul is expressed by his rage against Michal. She, essentially raises the fact that he's unfit to be king. And he comes back at her and says, basically, it was before, the God who chose me over your father Saul is the one before whom I am dancing. And so she's called in that whole passage daughter of Saul because she's sort of the last standing member of the house of Saul. And in sort of sentencing her to a childless future, no child until the day of her death, Cheryl Exum calls this a literary murder. That house of Saul is finally defeated. So absolutely. Yes. All right. So I hope I can repeat this for the audience. So you were seeing the stories in the Bible sort of as warnings about the danger of women taking too much power, manipulating David. Is that correct? Yeah, and you saw my scroll, the Esther scroll that I had up there in the slide. I will discuss all royal women. So I think, the potency of women is threatening. Women are operating, Solomon is benefiting, right? And Solomon, she's the hero in this sense because she's promoting Solomon, who you want to be king, who becomes the later hero. So her endorsement of him is valorous. But then David here is weak. Is she manipulating him? I think that the case study I didn't discuss, the divorce and extradition and execution of a royal woman, shows that the fact that women had these powers was also threatening to the system. It kept the system going, but there was also a danger there. And when women became too powerful, they met violent ends, which is what you see at Ugarit. Very interesting. That is a fascinating question. So this is a question about how I might take this into the world of religion, especially say at Ugarit, where you have all the mythic texts, where there's different requests people would make of Ishtar or Baal. And, I think that's a really important question. I've focused, my work on historical texts, but there's a lot to be said about the house of El. El is a father, Baal is rising up, Athirat, being the broker, being the queen mother. So there's a lot to be said about that.